Hello, welcome to a mashup of On the Waterfront and Travelogue here on Sparks 1524. I am Nathaniel Miller. The battleship Texas was commissioned in March of 1914. Now, back during these early days of battleship construction, it was pretty much an arms race between us, Britain, France, Germany, even Russia, Japan. The United States was building two-ship battleship classes for a time because these ships were not expected to serve more than maybe 10 or 15 years due to the rapid advancement in technology. Just as an example, the Texas is the first U.S. battleship to ever wind up with anti-aircraft guns because guess what was coming? Aviation. But the ship was only supposed to serve until the late 20s, maybe the early 30s, before being scrapped and replaced by newer, more modern ships. In World War I, she assisted the British by escorting convoys with vital war material, and she actually sailed with the British Grand Fleet to meet the German fleet during the surrender of 1918. That had been the plan had been that was the end of her service. And then the Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 happened. This was an attempt to halt the arms race of battleships. For the period of the treaty, we would not build any new battleships. But ships like Texas got an extended lease of life because we were not going to build any more ships, so we're going to upgrade this one. During the 1920s, the ship received a newfangled idea. In addition to the anti-aircraft gun, she received torpedo blisters. A torpedo blister is literally a blister built onto the side of the hull. It's curved outward. It's a void space full of either air or seawater for ballast, but it's a void space. The idea is that a torpedo hits that blister, a good bit of the torpedo's detonation is absorbed in that blister and doesn't go through to the main hull or the machinery inside the ship, or, a little more critically, the sailors inside the ship. Well, little thing happened in December of 1941 that kind of pulled us into another world war. And the Texas served most famously out of her entire career supporting the invasions at D-Day. In fact, the Texas nearly grounded herself along in several destroyers because on Omaha Beach, where our forces, American forces, were landing, there was a German position that was a lot stronger than we'd anticipated, and it was looking like they were going to push our people off the beach. The Texas and a few destroyers came in so close to shore that they all nearly grounded themselves to be able to hit that German position and wipe it out. They succeeded, and we all know how D-Day turned out and how World War II ended. Well, in 1948, the ship was decommissioned and handed over to the state of Texas as a museum. This made her one of the first of the World War II generation ships to become a museum. It made her the very first large deck 20th century built ship to become a museum. The lessons learned from Texas greatly increased our knowledge of how to maintain a museum ship, and that's gone on to maintain ships like the battleship Alabama in Wisconsin, the battleship Massachusetts or New Jersey, as well as smaller ships. And this is where the Texas story almost comes to a crashingly rusty halt. Texas was birthed in San Jacinto, which is south end of Texas, and one of the reasons for putting her there was the Battle of San Jacinto is where Texas, which by the way is my native state, I was born in San Angelo, won our independence from Mexico at the Battle of San Jacinto. So putting the Texas, the battleship, right within sight of the San Jacinto Monument seemed to make a lot of sense. One little problem. Foot traffic was really low. There just wasn't a lot of people coming, and I visited the ship there in 2018, and there was a handful of people, but it was deserted. It was empty. The lack of foot traffic means that Battleship Texas Foundation cannot raise the money that they need to raise to keep the ship in good repair. So there's getting to be talk. The ship needs to go into a dry dock first and get a massive overhaul done, and then go to a new location where there's more foot traffic, or the ship needs to be scrapped. Maybe some specific structural members saved, but the ship would have to be scrapped because otherwise she's just going to collapse in the water. Nobody wanted that to happen. Well, the Battleship Texas Foundation, the state of Texas, and Gulf Copper Drydock and Rig Repair in Galveston came up with a win-win-win solution. Gulf Copper went out and bought a used dry dock, literally a used floating dry dock that had been damaged trying to lift a ship too heavy for it. They towed it to Galveston and they repaired it. The Texas was towed with funding from both the Battleship Foundation and the state of Texas. The battleship herself was towed from San Jacinto up to Galveston and put into dry dock. So that's part of the win-win-win. Galveston wins because there's an economic boom that's going to come, or a boost, I should say, because once the Texas is refloated, Gulf Copper now has this massive dry dock enabling them to service bigger ships, which means more money for the company and for Galveston. The next is that Texas is getting severely restored. I say severely, that's a funny way to put it. Texas is getting a massive restoration while new locations are being looked at. To maintain a museum ship like this is a three-way partnership. You have your state government that obviously authorizes it and funds it to a degree, or authorizes the foundation to raise the funds, but the state's involved. You have the foundation, which actually runs the ship and raises money, but you also have the city she's located in. And the city has to put up the money for infrastructure improvements to help maintain this ship. So it's not just a matter of, oh, let's find dock space and we'll put the ship there and start charging admission. There's a lot that goes into maintaining a museum ship. So she is in dry dock, and to raise money, raise awareness, and just keep the ship alive, if you will, the Battleship Foundation, the Battleship Texas Foundation partnered with Gulf Coast Copper and Dry Dock and Rig Repair to offer dry dock tours, meaning visitors can go and walk underneath and tickle the tummy of a battleship. And when you start walking under the Texas and you go deep under the hull toward the center line, you have no concept anymore that you're under a ship. You are simply walking, or actually kind of crouched down and crawling, especially 6'4" me. You're kind of half crouched and duck walking underneath a vast, huge structure. There is no concept it's a ship anymore. I met with a couple of buddies. Now, when I was in the Navy, the only ship I was ever ship's company on, I deployed several times, but as a shipwrighter, the only time I was ship's company was on board USS Ponce, LPD-15, last of the Austin-class LPDs. So I drove down to Galveston in late April with my friend Wright Sublette. Wright had been in the Navy many years before me. He served as a gunner's mate on board the USS Austin, LPD-4, the first of the Austin-class LPDs. We met David and Nikki Allen at Galveston. Now, David and I served aboard Ponce together. So, and Nikki she's a good woman. She puts up with all of us. Although sometimes I think she prefers hanging out with the dogs. So as we get to Galveston, on a whim, I had taken my old hard hat. Now, this was a hard hat I wore on board USS Ponce. And I took it with me just in case if I could get to wear it on this dry dock. That would be so cool. But it would have to be according to their rules. They might require only their hard hats. Well, I got to wear my old Ponce hard hat. I also brought the flags from the USS Ponce. I was able to get a hold of at her decommissioning in 2017. I got a hold of the quarterdeck flags that we always put up on Ponce, the American flag and the Navy flag. And a few years earlier, I had kind of accidentally come into possession of one of the Navy Jacks, specifically the Navy Jack we flew when I was on board her. So all three of those flags are flags that I have a personal connection to because they were on the ship. Well, me and David both. They were on the ship when we were there. Also, this is Battleship Pookie. I met him back in 2018. He was crewing the Texas, decided to adopt me. So I brought him back to see his old ship, which got a lot of laughs out of people when they saw me pulling up. Of course, you have Albus the Traveling Crab and Battleship Pookie, and people were laughing and having a good time when they saw me putting up there to take some pictures with them with the ship in the background. The biggest danger to Texas, as it turns out, was not the overall structure, the ship's internal structure, her frames, her main decking, all of those things that kind of hold the whole thing together on the inside are remarkably strong for a 109-year-old ship. The primary threat came from flooding due to her shell plating that was corroding. A good part of the torpedo blisters had to be pulled off, and a lot of that plating is just going to have to be replaced because what was there is corroded. The good news about the torpedo blisters is they help protect the ship's original main hull, so a lot of that original steel that's riveted is still there. But when you're touring underneath the ship, you'll notice numbers all over the place. These are the numbers that tell you how many thousandth of an inch worth of steel is there. I don't remember exactly what they said because we were getting information overload. It was amazing. But at a certain, they mark all that all over the hull so they know where they need to replace and where they just need to clean and repaint. The ship's propellers were removed from her when the Navy decommissioned her in 1948. So you got the point where the shafts come out of the hull, but they're just plugged. So you can see where the shafts would come out, and you can see the markings on the hull where the shaft mounts would have been that would hold them in place so the two propellers could turn. She still has her rudder, and that's an interesting story. The ship's rudder is permanently I say welded, but not welded with a torch, but permanently stuck at a 14-degree angle to starboard. Nobody knows if that was the final rudder command she was given as she was docked for the last time before decommissioning, or if the Navy did that, like removing the propellers to make the ship harder to turn back into a warship. Nobody knows. There are no plans to straighten the rudder, if for no other reason. Well, it's been like that since World War II, and it's kind of a neat little trivia for the ship. But the bigger thing is that rudder hasn't moved since 1948. It's stuck. It's pretty much welded into place because that hinge has not moved in, 70, 80 years almost. Now, that actually caused some of the damage the ship is having to deal with on her port side, because when she was in San Jacinto, she was moored bow into a nice, beautiful little cove. But of course, you have tidal shifts happening, so water comes in and out of the cove with the tide. Plus, it was an industrial area, so you had these large cargoing ships, mostly petroleum ships and natural gas carriers, but these large ships passing through the channel behind the Texas. Well, of course, they are kicking up, even going slow. A 50,000 ton, 60,000 ton ship is shoving 50 or 60,000 tons of water out of its way. Even if you're not going that fast, you're still kicking up a little bit of a wake, which meant for decades, Texas had water regularly hitting her from the stern coming in. Well, with the rudder at a 14-degree angle to starboard, that water coming in from the stern was largely shunted up along the port side while the starboard side was protected. And you can see that today because the port side of the ship has got a lot more work that's got to be done. Getting to get underneath a historic ship like this was just quite an experience. Well, just being underneath a ship in dry dock, it's impressive enough to be under an aircraft carrier or a battleship like the New Jersey or the Missouri or the Wisconsin that's still floating. You're on the pier looking up. Those things are huge, but you don't get a sense of the size of these vehicles until you're underneath them in a dry dock and you can see the 20 or 30 feet that's hidden below the waterline. Currently, the Texas is scheduled to leave dry dock and be refloated in August. The Battleship Texas Foundation is working with the state to try and extend that until December. If the Texas stays in dry dock till December, my friends and I, Wright, David, Nikki, and I, we plan to go down again. So if that happens, I'll obviously do another update about what her condition is and how she's doing. Texas is the only battleship left in the world from the Dreadnought era. She's the only United States warship still afloat that fought in World War I and World War II. If you want to read more about this, my written column is linked below in the description. The Battleship Texas Foundation is also linked below in the description. Please check them out. I hope you've had a good time. I hope you have a great weekend coming up. Until we meet again here on Sparks 1524, always remember, have a great Navy day and go do great things.